structure of this building is not perfect. It could fall anytime.
Just focus on your cleaning work.
In the gleaming corridors of Meridian architecture and engineering, Michelle moves quietly, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the marble floors like whispered secrets. The smell of fresh blueprint ink mingles with the distant hum of high-tech printers, creating an atmosphere thick with innovation and unspoken hierarchy. No one knows that beneath her janitorial uniform lies a master's degree in structural engineering from MIT. No one even notices when she pauses outside the conference room, her trained eyes scanning the blueprints spread across the mahogany table. But when senior engineer Robert Harrison and his team of architects struggle with the structural calculations for the new 47-story downtown tower, she observes from the doorway. Her dark eyes trace the load-bearing specifications, noting the critical miscalculations they're missing. The inadequate foundation depth, the insufficient lateral bracing, the way the wind load factors don't account for the building's unique geometry. The seismic joints, Michelle whispers, stepping forward with her cleaning cart. They're positioned incorrectly for this soil composition. Robert barely glances her way, his voice sharp with irritation. "Ma'am, we need this area clear. This is highly technical engineering work." The junior architects snicker behind their laptops, their pressed shirts rustling with assumed superiority. They see only the uniform, gray coveralls, a simple name tag reading Michelle Carter, Custodial Services. They don't see the years of advanced structural analysis, the countless nights she'd spent calculating seismic loads and foundation settlements. What they didn't know was that Michelle had spent 8 years as a lead structural engineer at the prestigious firm Blackstone and Associates, where she'd designed earthquake-resistant foundations for buildings twice this size. She'd left everything behind when her father suffered a stroke, trading professional recognition for family responsibility, choosing love over career advancement. And with just one glance at their blueprints, she was about to predict exactly what would happen when construction reached the 23rd floor. The building's foundation would shift, the lateral supports would buckle, and everything they'd built would begin to sway in ways that defied safety margins. Michelle's hand moved toward the blueprint, but she hesitated. In her 3 years of custodial work, she'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the structural flaw. It's being right when everyone expects you to be invisible, because sometimes the person they overlook holds the key to preventing disaster. Before we continue with Michelle's incredible story, I want you to know that this channel is dedicated to sharing powerful stories of hidden experts who save the day through quiet brilliance. If these stories inspire you to look beyond appearances and recognize talent wherever it exists, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. It truly helps us reach more people with these important messages. Also, I'd love to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how often do you think professional expertise gets dismissed because of someone's job title? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's see what happened when Michelle's engineering prediction came true. Michelle Carter had worked at Meridian for 2 years, arriving each morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp, her thermos of coffee in one hand and her worn canvas bag in the other. The bag contained engineering journals she read during breaks, structural calculation notebooks, and a faded photo of her father, the reason she'd left her 6-figure engineering career. The senior engineers walked by her as if she were part of the building's infrastructure, necessary but unremarkable. Robert Harrison, the lead structural engineer, had never once acknowledged her presence, despite her proximity to their most critical projects. To him, she was simply another member of the cleaning staff, someone who emptied trash cans and wiped down conference tables. But Michelle watched. She always watched. The firm's glass-walled offices gleamed with cutting-edge technology, their walls lined with awards from the American Society of Civil Engineers. $1-million contracts hung framed in the lobby. Yet the most qualified structural engineer in the building remained invisible. She'd grown accustomed to the casual dismissals, the way conversations stopped when she entered to empty wastebaskets, the assumption that her presence was purely functional. The Meridian Tower project was their most ambitious undertaking, a 47-story mixed-use building that would become the city's new landmark. Michelle had been quietly observing their progress for months, noting discrepancies between the architectural drawings and the structural calculations. On that Wednesday morning, Michelle heard something that made her engineering instincts scream warnings. The conference room buzzed with heated discussion about foundation, issues that had emerged during the early excavation phase. The soil reports show more clay content than anticipated, she heard Robert tell his team. We'll need to adjust our foundation depth accordingly. Michelle moved closer with her cleaning supplies, her practiced eye catching details they'd completely missed. The soil composition wasn't just different, it was fundamentally unstable for their current foundation design. More critically, their seismic bracing calculations were based on outdated soil density assumptions that could prove catastrophic. She whispered, "The foundation specs won't hold in expansive clay." Robert turned, his expression shifting from concentration to mild annoyance. "Miss, we're in the middle of a critical engineering review. Perhaps you could return to clean this room later?" The junior engineers chuckled softly, one muttering, "Next, she'll be telling us how to design bridges." But deep inside, something had stirred. Not anger. Michelle had learned to transform that emotion into analytical precision. It was the same systematic thinking that had earned her recognition as MIT's top structural engineering graduate, that had made her the youngest person ever promoted to senior engineer at Blackstone and Associates. As she wheeled her cart away from the conference room, Michelle made a decision that would save lives. 3 weeks later, the crisis began exactly as Michelle had calculated. The phone call from the construction site came at 2:17 p.m., sending every engineer at Meridian into emergency mode. The foundation had begun settling unevenly, causing visible stress fractures in the concrete structure that had reached the 15th floor. Site supervisor Jake Martinez's voice crackled through the speakerphone, panic evident in every word. "The east corner has dropped nearly 2 inches overnight. We've got microfractures running up the load-bearing columns, and the building's showing lateral movement in 15-mile-per-hour winds." Robert Harrison barked orders to his team while sweat beaded on his forehead. "Pull up the soil analysis reports, now, and get me the original foundation calculations." Michelle appeared in the conference room doorway, ostensibly to empty the wastebaskets, but her movement was swift and purposeful. She'd witnessed this exact scenario during her Blackstone years, the telltale signs of foundation failure in expansive clay soil. Her eyes went immediately to the structural drawings, mentally calculating the load redistribution needed to prevent catastrophic collapse. Without thinking, she spoke with the authority of her MIT training. "Mr. Harrison, you need immediate soil stabilization with micropiles and a complete redesign of the lateral bracing system. The clay's expansion coefficient is causing differential settlement that will only accelerate." Dead silence. 8 pairs of eyes turned to her with expressions ranging from shock to outright indignation. "Excuse me?" Robert's voice carried the sharp edge of professional authority being challenged by someone he considered completely unqualified. "Are you seriously attempting to provide engineering consultation on a multi-million-dollar construction project?" Senior architect Patricia Wells stepped forward, with a condescending smile that could cut glass. "Michelle, we understand you're concerned, but this requires advanced structural engineering knowledge and professional licensing. Perhaps you could focus on your custodial duties while we handle the technical crisis?" Michelle felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but this time the stakes were too high for pride. She'd seen buildings collapse from exactly these conditions. Workers could die. The downtown area could be evacuated. This wasn't about professional recognition, it was about preventing a disaster that her expertise could stop. The microfractures will propagate along the tension zones, Michelle said firmly, her voice cutting through their murmurs of disbelief. At the current settlement rate, you have maybe 72 hours before the structure becomes unsafe for occupancy. Robert's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. That's quite enough. Security, please escort Michelle from this room immediately. She's interfering with emergency engineering operations. As the security guard approached, Michelle looked directly at the structural drawings spread across the table. The stress patterns were unmistakable. The failure progression predictable with mathematical precision. She knew, with the certainty that comes from years of advanced engineering analysis, that they had perhaps 3 days before the building became uninhabitable. She walked away, but this time the emotion coursing through her veins wasn't humiliation. It was the absolute knowledge that she was right, and the devastating awareness that lives hung in the balance while her expertise was being wasted. That wasn't just professional dismissal. That was dangerous negligence about to collide with the laws of physics. In her modest apartment, 15 minutes from downtown, Michelle sat with a leather portfolio, its edges worn from countless readings. The small living space was carefully organized. Engineering textbooks lined built-in shelves, her father's Purple Heart displayed above the television, and certificates from MIT and various engineering societies covering one entire wall. Inside the portfolio, embossed in gold lettering, read Outstanding Achievement in Structural Engineering, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Class of 2015. The pages contained her senior thesis on seismic-resistant foundation design, letters of recommendation from professors who'd called her brilliant and the most promising structural engineer of her generation, and her professional engineering license from the state of Massachusetts. Back then, complex load calculations and foundation dynamics were her native language. She'd worked alongside the most respected structural engineers in Boston, her innovative approaches to soil stabilization earning recognition in professional journals. Dr. James Whitfield, her MIT advisor, had personally recommended her for the doctoral program, calling her a natural problem solver with intuitive understanding of structural behavior. The last time she'd opened this portfolio, she'd been packing her Boston apartment, preparing to leave everything behind. Her father had suffered a massive stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to manage his diabetes medication. The rehabilitation costs were staggering, and his insurance covered only basic care. She'd walked into her supervisor's office at Blackstone and Associates on a rainy Friday afternoon, her resignation letter shaking in her hands. "He raised me alone after Mom died," she'd whispered. "Worked 3 jobs to put me through MIT. I can't abandon him when he needs me most." Her supervisor had fought to keep her. Offers of remote work, flexible scheduling, even assistance with her father's medical expenses. But Michelle had already made her choice. Family trumped career advancement. Love came before professional achievement. The move to her hometown had been like stepping into a different world. Jobs requiring her engineering expertise were non-existent in the small city. The custodial position at Meridian was stable, offered health insurance for her father's medications, and allowed her to be home every evening to help with his physical therapy. But this time, as Michelle closed the portfolio and reached for her laptop, she didn't cry over lost opportunities. She turned to the city's building inspection database and started drafting a detailed engineering report. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, documenting every structural flaw she'd observed in the Meridian Tower project. She calculated precise load tolerances, identified specific failure points, and outlined emergency stabilization procedures that could prevent collapse. "There it is," she whispered, attaching her engineering credentials to the comprehensive report. The expertise was always there. She hit send, forwarding copies to the city building inspector, the structural engineering board, and the mayor's office. The city building inspector's office was buzzing with urgent activity at 7 a.m., when Michelle's report landed in Chief Inspector David Chen's inbox. She'd spent the entire night creating a comprehensive structural analysis that would leave no room for dismissal or misinterpretation. Her report was a masterpiece of engineering precision. 47 pages of detailed calculations, soil analysis corrections, foundation redesign specifications, and emergency stabilization protocols. She'd included her MIT credentials, her Massachusetts PE license, and her publication history in structural engineering journals. Within the city's emergency response system, she submitted urgent safety citations with mathematical proof that the Meridian Tower posed imminent danger to public safety. Each citation was technically flawless, professionally worded, and impossible to ignore. She referenced current building codes, attached photographic evidence of the stress fractures, and provided detailed cost estimates for emergency remediation. When she finished her engineering analysis, Michelle looked at the structural photos from the construction site posted on the project's public database. The crack patterns were progressing exactly as her calculations predicted. Diagonal tension failures that would soon compromise the building's integrity. There was nothing else to add. Her engineering expertise was documented, her warnings were official, and her recommendations were precisely detailed. She quietly returned to her custodial duties, arriving at Meridian at her usual 5:30 a.m. start time. At 8:15 a.m., Chief Inspector Chen arrived unannounced at Meridian with a team of structural engineers and an immediate stop work order. His face was grim as he confronted Robert Harrison in the lobby. "We've received a comprehensive engineering report identifying critical structural deficiencies in your tower project," Chen announced, holding Michelle's analysis. "This building is condemned pending immediate structural remediation." Within minutes, the construction site was evacuated. Soon, news vans filled the street as reporters learned about the near-catastrophic structural failure that had been narrowly averted. This could have been worse than the Surfside collapse, Chief Inspector Chen told the assembled media. Someone with serious structural engineering expertise identified these problems before they became fatal. The engineering report went viral within hours on professional social media platforms. Structural engineers across the country shared Michelle's analysis, praising the thoroughness and accuracy of her calculations. By noon, Meridian's insurance company had launched a full investigation. The Architectural Licensing Board opened a formal inquiry into the firm's quality control procedures. The mayor's office announced new oversight requirements for high-rise construction projects. The story that emerged wasn't just about structural engineering. It was about the cost of dismissing expertise based on job titles and appearances. Local news stations began investigating. Who was the mystery engineer who saved downtown from disaster? They pulled the building inspection records, and there she was, Michelle Carter, Master of Science in Structural Engineering from MIT, 8 years of senior-level engineering experience, licensed professional engineer in 3 states, and the author of the report that had just saved their city from potential disaster. "That's our custodial worker," whispered Patricia Wells, her voice heavy with dawning horror at what they'd dismissed. Thursday morning, Michelle sat across from Robert Harrison, Patricia Wells, and Meridian's senior partners in the firm's executive conference room. Her worn portfolio rested on the polished table, containing the same credentials and achievements that had traveled with her from Boston. "You want to know who I am," she said, her voice steady and professional. "So, I'll show you." She opened her portfolio and placed her MIT diploma on the table. Master of Science, Structural Engineering, summa cum laude. Then came her professional licenses, her publications in the Journal of Structural Engineering, and a letter of recommendation that began, "Michelle Carter possesses the finest analytical mind for structural problems I have encountered in 30 years of engineering practice. I didn't leave structural engineering because I wasn't capable," she continued. her words measured and precise. "I left because my father was dying, and he needed me more than my career. I've spent 2 years emptying your wastebaskets while watching you make fundamental errors that could have killed people." Robert Harrison shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame. "We had no way of knowing your background." "You never asked," Michelle interrupted with gentle firmness. "In 2 years, not one person at this firm has ever inquired about my education, my experience, or my professional background. You saw a black woman in custodial uniform and assumed you knew everything about my capabilities." The silence in the room was deafening. "I didn't abandon engineering," she said, placing the city's commendation letter on the table. "Engineering never left me. I just had to step away from the recognition to care for someone I love." She stood, gathering her credentials with the quiet dignity she'd maintained through 2 years of invisibility and condescension. "Your building is standing because I recognized failure patterns you missed. How many other projects might have benefited from asking the right questions of the right people, regardless of their job title?" She paused at the door, turning back to face them. "Expertise doesn't announce itself through designer suits or corner offices. It whispers through careful observation and shouts through results. But only when people are humble enough to listen." In that quiet conference room, they finally saw Michelle Carter not as their custodial worker, but as the structural engineer whose expertise had prevented a catastrophe. The next morning, Michelle stepped into Meridian's lobby like always, but everything had fundamentally changed. The usual morning bustle stopped as she entered. Then, led by the receptionist who'd never before acknowledged her presence, a wave of respectful applause began to ripple through the assembled staff. The entire office, engineers, architects, administrators, and support staff stood and clapped for nearly 2 minutes. Department heads who had walked past her for 2 years now looked at her with expressions of genuine respect and admiration. "On behalf of everyone at Meridian," Robert Harrison said, his voice carrying a humility that hadn't existed before, "we want to thank you for your professional expertise and your commitment to public safety, even when we failed to recognize your qualifications." Later that afternoon, Meridian's managing partners announced the creation of a new position: Senior Structural Engineer and Safety Compliance Director, designed specifically around Michelle's expertise and her proven ability to identify critical structural issues. The role would involve overseeing all major projects, consulting on complex engineering challenges, and leading the firm's new quality assurance protocols. She was invited to present her findings at the National Structural Engineering Conference. Under one condition: "I want to address the systematic issues that lead to qualified professionals being overlooked," she told the managing partners. "This isn't about me, it's about every expert whose voice gets silenced by assumptions." The convention center's main auditorium was packed 2 months later. Structural engineers from across the nation, building inspectors, and construction industry leaders filled every seat. Michelle stepped up to the podium and looked at them, seeing faces that finally reflected genuine professional interest and respect. "Engineering excellence doesn't require corner offices or expensive suits," she began, clicking to her first slide, showing the Meridian Tower stress analysis. "It requires knowledge, experience, and the courage to speak truth about structural safety." She advanced to dramatic photos of the building's foundation failure. This structure was 72 hours away from catastrophic collapse. It was saved not by hierarchy or job titles, but by engineering expertise that happened to be wearing custodial coveralls. The most dangerous assumption in our profession isn't a miscalculation, it's the assumption that competence can be judged by appearance, position, or preconceived notions about who deserves to be heard. The auditorium fell completely silent as her words resonated. Every person in our industry has something valuable to contribute. The question is, are we professional enough to listen to each other, regardless of job title, race, or roll. The entire room stood in thunderous applause. But Michelle knew the real victory wasn't in their recognition. It was in the conversations about inclusion and expertise that would continue long after the conference ended. Today, Michelle leads Meridian's Structural Safety Division. Her expertise finally matched with the recognition and authority it always deserved. But she hasn't forgotten her journey. Every month, she mentors young engineers and speaks at career development programs, sharing not just technical knowledge, but the wisdom that comes from being underestimated. Her father lived to see her professional vindication, proudly displaying her Engineer of the Year award next to his Purple Heart until he passed peacefully 2 years later. In his final days, he squeezed her hand and said, "I always knew you'd change the world. Baby girl." The Meridian Tower was successfully completed using Michelle's redesigned foundation specifications and now stands as one of the city's most structurally sound buildings. A plaque in the lobby reads, "Structural integrity ensured through the expertise and vigilance of Michelle Carter, P.E." Meridian now requires all employees to complete bias training and has implemented the Carter Protocol, a systematic approach to recognizing and utilizing expertise from all team members, regardless of their position or background. Michelle still arrives at 5:30 a.m. with her coffee and canvas bag, but now she enters through the front doors as a respected senior engineer. When she walks through those corridors, she's not invisible. She's valued, consulted, and most importantly, heard. Because sometimes the person they overlook today becomes the leader who saves lives tomorrow. And true engineering expertise doesn't need permission to prevent disasters. It just needs someone brave enough to speak structural truth, even when the room isn't ready to listen.